Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge, episode 114. Huzzah! It's good to be here. Busy. But that's good. Most of the busy has got to do with the latest firewall, which we shot on Monday here in our little studio. We'd been shooting all of the others at a much larger place, but we invested in a couple extra lights. I'm going to get a 4K camera, I think, maybe by the time we do the next one. But even so, it looks great. And I had a little crummy little wireless lavalier mic for all of the time over targets and things like that. And we went out and got a real lav with a cable on it. The sound is so much better. It's really important to me that when the firewalls came back that they look better than they did when they left. Got a couple new transitions with real fireballs and stuff. So visually, it looks great. The show's called the Most Shameful Injustice, and it's David Horowitz gave me a 40-page pamphlet on what the Democrats, what 50, 60 years of Democrats have done to the big cities, New Orleans, and especially Detroit and Washington and Baltimore. So I had just 40 pages of data that I had to cull through. But it's really powerful, and it's shot, and it's pretty much edited. I'm working on the putting the elements in, and like I say, I've got rid of those digital fireball pushes, and I've just got actual big balls of flame in the background. So I think it looks great. I'm real happy with it. So that's good news. Just another assorted news here. As you know, I flew out to Tucson a little while ago. I did get a chance to get a price estimate on this new canopy, which I want really badly. As you know, I've been saying this before, the plane is gorgeous, but it's, as with all long easies, Bert's all about drag reduction. So when this canopy comes closed, it's touching me on the head. And I think I mentioned last Stratosphere Lounge, I hit some unexpected turbulence at a decent speed. And even though I'm really strapped in tight, this sent me up enough to knock my headsets off and put a little scratch on the inside of the canopy. Optically, it's a crummy canopy. Anyway, I found a guy who can do it, and I got a pretty good price, and hopefully I can be gone for about 3 weeks, but I can live with that if it's, something wonderful like that. Once I get that canopy done, I can start flying that baby long distances. I'm going to fly back and see our buddy Viper 6 and all those friends of ours back down in Florida. Probably do that in the spring, but that'll sure make life a lot more fun with the airplane. Anyway, so that's about it. We have 1 whole hour tonight. That's the rule. I have so much work to do left on the firewall. The website's basically sitting there ready to go. Wanted to open up everything all at the same time. So we'll have a new firewall. We'll have a new time over target series. We'll have a Nexus report, all that jazz, and that's going to happen before this next Wednesday. It's hoping to have it by today. Our friend Ian Branson's done incredible work for a long time, and we'll have a big celebration for this whole thing. It's tough trying to get the firewall and the website synced up, but that's what we're going to do. So we're going to knock through some questions here. As we said, this is the 1 hour edition, so we're going to have to kind of go quickly. And the last one is the one I want to take the most, but it's such bizarre inside baseball. It just doesn't seem fair. So let's get going. Victor Cuck says, back in 2012-13, you said the next president will come from the pop culture. Is Trump that prediction fully fulfilled? He is. I wasn't quite exactly what I was expecting. On some level, I feel like the Ghostbusters when it's like I had to imagine the Destructor, and it's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I don't want to really get into a whole lot into the whole Trump thing. Some people obviously just think he's just terrific. And I don't know. I'm just so alarmed when he says things like beat up protesters and things like that. It's just, anyway, I'm not going to rehash all of that. I did a Clavin Whittle show yesterday. We tape 8 at a time. And Andrew Clavin got a question. If you had to pick between Hillary and Bernie, which would you pick? And he picked Bernie, and I did too. Bernie's philosophy has murdered 100 million people, and Bernie's not a nice guy. But Bernie Sanders, unlike virtually everybody else on the left, least as consistent to his, to his beliefs. I think his net worth is $130,000 or something. Harry Reid, after a lifetime of public service, is worth $40-50 million. How he did that on a civil service salary is beyond me. And as Andrew Klavan said, if it's, if American people want full-blown socialism, give it to them. Let's get it over with. Just let's get it over with. Show them what happens when you double the debt from, 18 trillion to 30 trillion, and we'll sit around eating rats on spits over burning tires. But okay, you want your socialism? Here's what it looks like. I said during that segment, it's just the idea of a socialist being president is just such a stain on America's honor. And then I realized, well, that stain's already been put on there, so I guess we don't really have to worry about that. But I don't know. I do not know. I know that I came to realize after the Iowa caucuses, where Trump started making some noise about, well, this whole thing is just too expensive, not really get much out of it, and if I lose a few more, I might get out. I realized I think the only thing that can stop Donald Trump now is his own ego. If Cruz happens to win some big ones or something, it's just possible that he'll, just go. I mean, he changes so often and everything. Every day is some new adventure. But this business about, beating up protesters and stuff is just unseemly. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think there's a person in America who doesn't think that a country of 320 million people couldn't do better than this, honestly. I mean, we really just should be able to do better than this. I know Ted Cruz rather well. He was my candidate the whole time. I've met him many times backstage, and the person I see on stage is nothing like the guy I know. I've been real disappointed with that campaign of his. Rubio seems to be the only other contender, and, he's got all kinds of problems too. So, Donald Trump, is pulling a huge portion of the black vote. Just that alone will probably win him. I used to think I'd much rather fight against Bernie than Hillary. Now I'm beginning to think I'd rather. I think we got a better chance of beating Hillary. The only person with Donald Trump has the highest unfavorables in the race, followed by Hillary, and neither of those two people are particularly attractive to me personally. And I suppose if it's Trump versus Hillary, Trump would take her apart. And if it comes down to Trump versus Hillary, I know who I'm voting for, and there's no second doubt about that. There's nothing, I mean, if it comes down to Trump versus Hillary, that's the best we can do. Anyway, I don't want to spend any more time on Donald Trump, but you get the idea. So, yes, it was my prediction. I was not expecting this. I was expecting, I don't know, Clint Eastwood maybe would have been nice, or somebody. Anyway, there it is. Now, John Frost has got a big old long question here, and I'm going to try and boil it down. The question comes down to the first sentence, which is, what is the antithesis of communism? And then basically talks a lot about progressives and the idea that they have the idea to the the universal engine of change. But I'm fascinated with that first question. What is the antithesis of communism? Conservatism is the antithesis of communism. This idea that somehow we're right-wingers, that term right-wing, left-wing really came from, European Parliament prior to World War II, and it's absolutely, completely obsolete. But I think this point needs to be made a couple times, and as often as possible. The National Socialists, the Nazis, were they socialists? They certainly weren't socialists in the degree that that many members of the Nazi Party wanted to be socialists. They were fascists in the same way that Italy was fascist. But really, when you get right down to it, what's the difference? I mean, the Nazis and the fascists believed that the government should control industry and direct industry, and the communists decided that the government should own industry. But if you put those two things together, if you basically make a 3-point chart with communism, Nazism, and then conservatism, you can just go right down the list. Big state, yes. Big state, yes. Big state, no. Public works programs, yes. Public works programs, yes. Public works programs, no. Individual liberty, no. Individual liberty, no. Individual liberty, yes. Gun ownership, no. Gun ownership, no. Gun ownership, yes. And so we are the antithesis of both Nazism and communism, and it drives me nuts when people say that Nazis are right wingers and conservatives are right wingers. There's no comparison to what we call modern right wing American politics and where the term originally came from. They love to call us fascists and Nazis, but fascism, as I've said 100 times, means a bundle of sticks. The best way to think about this, I keep coming back to this because I think these are the only terms that have made sense to me. You know, we've seen the Republican Party abolish slavery, and they were a radical party. They were radicals in 1856 when they first ran for president. And now they're conservatives. And the reason is because the things that they liberated got liberated, and now those things need to be conserved against further change, which is making things worse. But the only two terms I think that really work, John, for me, consistently across the board, no matter how many times I try to get a handle on these labels, the only two terms that really work for me are collectivists versus individualists. Once you understand that's the basics, then everything else I think falls into place. The Nazis were collectivists. They believed that the state was everything. The state survives. You know, the whole Nazi youth thing and the whole propaganda they were giving to the young kids was that, you know, you can go out and fight and die in battle, but the state lives forever, and so you live forever. You live through the state. Ditto, obviously, for communism, and ditto for socialism too. You know, it's the Danish socialism or the Swedish socialism is not nearly as venal as these other two, obviously, because Scandinavians are a much nicer people than the Germans or the Russians. But again, just since it bears being mentioned, socialism, the nice socialism in Denmark and in Sweden and stuff, exists for two or three reasons. First of all, it exists because they don't have to pay for their defense against Russia. We pay for the defense against Russia so they can afford all these social welfare programs. American taxpayers pay for Scandinavian socialism. That's number one. Number two, socialism, as I've said, has to be a pyramid scheme, and you have to have more people at the bottom than you do at the top. 4 people can take care of 1 person, but 1 person can't take care of 4. The Swedish birth rate is so low that the Swedish population is halving nearly every 50 years. So you have to bring new people in to keep the benefits coming, and the new people they've brought in have not been very nice. So now Sweden, this arch model of socialism and wonderful world that Bernie Sanders wants to take us to, is now in a state of collapse. It's on the verge of a state of collapse. And I saw something just so shocking. I mean, a really quiet little story. I think I saw it on Drudge. I think I'm virtually positive it was Norway. It was Norway. And Norway has just asked for emergency legislation to say that if Sweden collapses, we will no longer be beholden to the International Rights Convention, or it may even be part of the Geneva Convention, and we will turn away asylum seekers at the border without interviewing them. If Sweden collapses, says Norway, we need legislation to make sure that we can stop all of the Swedes and all of the other immigrants from coming into Norway. So this Swedish model is about to collapse under the weight of its own political correctness. And the people that they brought in order to keep the benefits going for Sweden has no connection to Sweden. Now, Richard Dew says that Sweden has its own defense industry. That's true, and they fly 20 jets, and the Viggen's a very nice airplane, and they have ground troops as well. But the Swedish Air Force, the Swedish Navy, and the Swedish Army are no match for the Soviet Union or Russia. No match at all, none. So I'm not saying they don't have a defense. I'm saying they don't have enough defense to matter in any way, shape, or form against a determined Russian assault. As a matter of fact, I don't think Europe combined has a defense that will put much of a dent in Russia if Russia was so inclined. The only military that can stop Russia is America, and that's why we've been over there for 70 years. So the only other things I want to say about this communism-socialism thing is that socialism in Sweden doesn't work because we're paying for their their socialism. It doesn't work because they have to bring in new workers to make up the bottom, and these new workers are North Africans, and they're not Swedes, and they're murdering Swedes and raping Swedes in record numbers. And socialism doesn't work because this great thing from this Danish school teacher who said, hey, look, everybody's in America is talking about how great it is in Denmark, but Denmark has the highest tax rates in the world. 80% of what we make goes away. And because of that, we have the highest personal debt in the world because we have to buy things that we don't have any money left over for. A $24,000 car in America is $50,000, $60,000 in Sweden because they had, in Denmark because they had 100% tax. And this woman said that if you want to do something in Denmark, you can't. You can't follow your dreams in Denmark. Denmark has a suicide rate that's the highest in the world. That's odd. They think they're just have to answer this. Richard Dew says, tell that to Finland in 1939. Finland in 1939, Richard, was much more heavily armed than they are today. And the Soviet Union, at the beginning of World War II in 1939, had essentially no troops whatsoever. All of their officers had been killed. The Red Army had nothing like the kind of resources that it had, which is why the Red Army got so completely demolished in 1941. So it's not fair to compare the two. But anyway, Sweden and Denmark and all these places are just, Denmark also has the highest level of depression and the highest percentage of the population that's on antidepressants. So I don't think this whole thing works very much. And finally, the argument is, what does Sweden produce in that American exceptionalism thing? Swedish inventions, top Swedish inventions for the last 100 years were the spherical bearing in the 1920s and kidney dialysis machine in the 1950s. They don't create anything. Why would they? So I'm really tired of hearing about how wonderful socialism is, and we're going to hear a lot more about it during the rest of the year. But I made these points on the thing with the young people and just kind of hammered it home, and can't hammer it home enough. So moving on, Derek Benningfield says, hi, Bill, greetings from Canada. I love your show, and I have been following your work for about 4 years now. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you, Derek. You're one of the people who has helped me develop my conservatism to the point where it is now, although I have always been a conservative. I do have a question for you, though. As conservatives, we take pride in not being little control freak, free speech hating crybabies. How then do we ever allow ourselves to be governed by such people? That's a great question, and I addressed it a couple times in some of the speaking that I did during the weekend. We have such an enormous disadvantage. Conservatives have such an enormous disadvantage over compared to liberals because we have businesses and we have lives, and many of us have religion, and many of us have hobbies and jobs and stuff. And religion and jobs and philosophy and hobbies are all rolled into one for far leftists. Politics is their religion. Politics is their business. Their A team goes into politics. Our C team goes into politics. And they just simply are very difficult to fight because they never give up. They're certainly not above cheating because they have this vision of the greater good. So if we have to steal a few votes in order to bring about paradise on earth, a small price to pay. Look, the real short answer to this, Derek, is the reason we let them rule us is because we play by the rules and they don't. We mind our own business and they don't. That's really pretty much it. But it's time for us to do something about this. It's past time. It's way past time. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that I take some satisfaction in, and I think actually is some hope, is that the left is just eating itself. It's all these people who've been fighting for progressive causes, like white males or white women, have been fighting for progressive causes for 40 years, are now being told to shut up by the monsters that they created because they're too privileged. And on one hand, they go, oh, you're right. No, I hadn't realized how privileged I was. And on the other hand, they come out and say things like, but I've been fighting this fight for 50 years. I'm not a racist. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. How does it feel to be unjustly accused of racism? Not so good, huh? So while it just can't last, and everybody knows it, the reason we're so heavily armed and the reason we're running around with our hair on fire is because we can see what's happened in the past and what's coming. I had a Churchill quote that I'd never heard before, and I just really like it a lot. And it says, the longer you look back, the further you can look forward. And that's exactly right. I'm not as worried about I'm much more worried than people on the street, not because of what's happening today, but because of what I see is going to happen in the future. This is not maintainable. It's simply not sustainable, if you'll pardon the expression. This kind of borrowing, this kind of moral decay, this kind of weakness, children who are 50, 60-year-old children, what are they going to do when they're 50 years old and haven't had listened to somebody who had a different opinion from them? They're unemployable. And I keep generalizing about the millennials. I'm talking about the cry bullies and stuff, and I just do need to stop every now and then and say I just met with a bunch of terrific young conservatives, and they're everywhere. And the soldiers and sailors and airmen, Marines, and Coast Guards people that we have out there right now are in many cases millennials, and they're the baddest asses we ever put out there. So I don't mean to keep generalizing, but the signs are not good, and and it's big things and it's little things. A week ago, there was a big announcement that said NASA is accepting applications for astronauts, and record numbers of people applied. And I thought, who are you kidding? What does NASA need astronauts for? NASA's got a bunch of astronauts already. NASA can't put our own astronauts onto our own space station. What the hell would NASA need a recruiting class of astronauts for? There are no plans for NASA to go back into space. No concrete plans. No launch systems that are under development. The only people that are going to get to go into space in the future, launched from the United States of America, will be riding on private space. They'll be riding on the Dragon capsule. They may be riding on something else that seems to be the only orbital option right now. So if I were you, I'd go work for SpaceX if you want to go into space. And again, it's heartbreaking. We're recruiting astronauts. For what? So you can wear a flight suit and go talk to high schools about science? We don't have a space program anymore. We have a space station, we just can't get to it. And what do you say about that? I think it was, the big argument is, was it ever worth it? Was it, a government program? I've heard that NASA's giving up more grants to private companies, and that's good, and that's certainly the future. And then, you see SpaceX do something like put a rocket into orbit, have the main stage come back and land on the pad it took off from. And as I said, on that afterburner, Russia can't do that, China can't do that. Russia and China can't do what a bunch of private citizens did. So, again, just to kind of tie it up in a bow, you've got the collectivist Russian space program, which are still flying, extremely effective, mind you. They're still flying the same basic booster that they put Sputnik into space in 1957. It's the same booster. And China's basically copying all this other stuff, and, China's done a couple of capsules in orbit and that sort of thing. But it's an individual named Elon Musk who had a vision that, hey, we can recover this booster and we're going to bring it down and land it. And he's not the only one. Bezos and Blue Horizon and all these guys. Virgin Galactic is there because of a vision of Richard Branson. These are individual people. Burt Rutan designed Spaceship One, which became the basis for Spaceship Two, because he'd always wanted to fly in space and he didn't see any way he could do it, so he just went out and built a space program. Not just a spaceship, a space program. And the astronaut that they picked was Bert's best friend who had come over, Mike Melville, who both of which are huge, probably the highest honor of my life to be able to say these are friends of mine. And Mike Melville came over from South Africa, had a few questions about the plans on the long easy, or maybe even the very easy, came and talked to Bert, and never went home. They got to be best friends. Mike was test pilot on all this stuff. Mike was a chase pilot on Voyager. Mike and Bert stuck together, and when they needed a pilot to fly into outer space, a civilian, they picked a 60-something-year-old South African guy who's a high school dropout, I think, but happens to be the best natural pilot maybe in the world, built out of nothing but courage, this guy, and he's Bert's friend. And frankly, it's the same advice I would give you if you asked me about, should I come to Hollywood? Hollywood is looking for screenwriters. If Hollywood is looking for screenwriters, that means that you're going to write scripts that are going to sit on shelves, and they're going to be turned down by 18-year-olds or 22-year-olds who are who are, the reviewers, and one of them will get through, and maybe you'll get a script sold for $50,000, and it'll sit on a shelf forever, and it'll get optioned, and they'll buy it because they don't want anybody else to have it, but it won't get made. And if it 1 in a million it does get made, then you're going to take your serious, in-depth, wonderful story that you put your life into, and they're going to add a talking dog because they think it'll increase the box office. So in the same way that if you want to be an astronaut, I'd get cozy with SpaceX or XCore or Virgin or something, or start your own company. Same thing for movies. If you wanted to start movies and make movies, go find a car dealer in wherever you are. If you live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, find a couple of car dealers, convince them, do your research, get the numbers, go out there and convince them that this $800,000 project is going to make more money than it costs, and go and make it. Coming to Hollywood would be the worst possible thing. I know it's a little off topic, but that's the way it goes. These individuals are what makes this thing go around, and individuals like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and all the rest of them, and Andrew Carnegie, just went out and did it in business. But again, back to your question, Derek, the left doesn't do business. And you need to call it what it is. I mean, it's only a year or two ago that I really fully realized that I call it what it is. Progressives are socialists, and they want to tell everybody else what to do, because progressives want the things that conservatives have or that businessmen have. They're just either too stupid or too lazy or both to go out and earn it on their own. So they want to take it from other people. They want to steal it from people who do. It's the makers and the takers, just that simple. So we put up with it because we mind our own business. And you know what? Here's the other thing too. The reason we've put up with all of this chicanery, really, when you get right down to it, is because despite the fact that all of these things are eroding and the economy's in real trouble, life has never been this good for anybody. So we put up with it because it's not costing us anything. It's costing us a lot of angst and ideological angst, and it's costing us, sleepless nights. But when you get right down to it so far, your life is as good as life has ever been on planet Earth. And so how ginned up are you going to get when life is this good? How likely are you to go man the barricades with a rifle when life is as good as it is? We are running around with our hair on fire because we can see that everything that made this good is not only under attack, it's just being actively destroyed. And we can look downstream and we can see what's coming. And these liberals can't or won't. So they just steal money, and doesn't belong to anybody. It's the government's money. And we don't do anything about it because it doesn't impact us. One of the things I set up in Oregon was, if I could do two things to save the country, I would repeal the 17th Amendment, and that would give the states power back. The Senate would then be representing the state of California, not the people of California who are represented in the House, because the states are the only thing with the power to actually balance the federal government. And the second thing I said, most people would have thought, well, repeal the income tax, but I think actually it's simpler than that. I just think it should be against the law to have payroll withholdings. I think if every single person in the country got their full pay and 4 times a year had to write a check for $7,000 or $12,000 or whatever, 4 times a year, had to take money that was in the bank and send it to Washington and write that check out, then if you did that 4 times a year, there'd be a revolution. The beautiful thing for the progressives and for the Democrats on the left about payroll withholding is, let's say you make $600 a week. Well, and you ask somebody, what do you make? I make $600 a week. Is that what you go home with? Oh, God, no, I go home with $420. And so the government will take thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from you, 40, 50% of your income, let's say. And then come April 15th, they give you $1,200 back of the $25,000 they've taken from you, and you go, woohoo, I'm rich. I'm getting a check. If you had to part with the money. See, the reason they get away with it is because you never touch it. You never touch the money. So, there they go. And Cheryl says, there'd be people who wouldn't save. Most people probably wouldn't save. But then, if you had to part with the money, actually part with it, then everybody in the country would start having to have some sense of, what am I buying with this money? What does this money get me? Where does it go? but we never touch it. And since we never touch it, it's not really ours. And since it's not really ours, we never miss it. That's it, really. We never touch it, so we never miss it. And it's a catastrophe. We're doing okay. Chris Taylor says, if Hillary isn't indicted over these email server crimes despite the evidence in the FBI results, does that make everyone else in jail for equal or lesser crimes into political prisoners? Since apparently they had to be found guilty of both whatever their official crime was and the unofficial crime of not being politically corrected enough. Or has that ship already sailed? Chris, if they don't press charges against Hillary Clinton, then it is the end of the rule of law in this country, and people need to start saying it. And we need to say there is an aristocratic class in this country, and it consists of rich and powerful people who have a D after their name and who contribute to the Democratic Party. And there's only one person to blame for this. Well, there's one institution to blame for this, and it's the press, the press, the press, the press, the press, the press, the press. The most brilliant thing the progressives did was start to take over the journalism department. Once they control the information, then, it's over. Most people don't think there's anything to the email. If you ask Democrats about the email scandal, they'll say it's 10% of teapot. Why? Because that's what MSNBC says, and because it's not on the CBS News every night. Abu Ghraib was on the front page of the New York Times every day for 52 days. So that must have been important, that stuff that happened over a weekend. But this is not, and so people don't, as I've said before, it's not just a question of not covering the news. The fact that they're not covering it all the time tells people it's not a story, certainly not an important story. But if she walks on this, then yes, those people should be released. And one of the big things now is that how does the FBI, this is what I think is actually the biggest incentive for there actually to be charges filed against her. How does the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and all the rest of these guys ever file charges against anybody ever again if Hillary Clinton just walks? I mean, how do they ever prosecute a guy who takes a thumb drive out of the office with some minor thing on it and try to put this guy in jail for security violations when the Secretary of State has 1,276 top secret or above emails on a server in a bathroom someplace? The people are going to die because of this. We will see consequences to this, but this will be long after, Barack Obama's out of office. It'll probably be 2, 3, 4 years from now before we really start to see the damage to all of this. And look, if she walks, then we just as conservatives just need to say, okay, we no longer have an agreement where we agree to be governed by the government, and in exchange for that, they have to follow the same laws as we do. They don't follow the same laws that we do, so we're not going to agree to be governed by them anymore. And I don't think that necessarily means an armed revolution. I think it really means, okay, we know what we're dealing with, so starve it. People have been talking about going Galt and all the rest of this stuff, but, seriously, if Hillary walks and Bernie wants to put in a 93% tax rate, give them their socialism, give them their lawlessness, withhold everything. The people who work hard in this country are the people who are the ones who should be looking out for themselves. And if you're running a business and you've got enough money to not run the business, close the business. What else do you do? It's like a cancer tumor. You have to starve it of the blood supply. Cheryl points out, if Snowden, she mentioned Snowden. If Snowden had been a Democrat, if Snowden had been Joe Biden, he wouldn't be in trouble either. So what do you say? It will be, and I think Roger Simon or Glenn Reynolds or somebody pointed out that if Hillary Clinton walks, it will be a revolution of the middle, of the quiet middle that actually pays the taxes and does the work. And I don't think they want to see that, because it's one thing if you have, Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matter rioting, but if the country, part of the country that does all the working, pays all the taxes, gives up, you could be in for a lot of trouble. If Hillary Clinton walks, that will be the end of this republic as we understand it. And it will be because of aristocracy. And the person who debates her, if she's the nominee, because if she walks, she will be the nominee, just simply needs to say, here are 2 statutes that you violated. It's got nothing to do with top secret. It simply says you must turn them in. You can't tamper with them. You've obviously broken these 2 laws. There's no question you broke the 2 laws. Just the fact that you had your own server means you broke the 2 laws. So since you're above these 2 laws, please tell the American people what other laws you're above. I'm going to assume it's all of them. But I think you need to tell them why you can get away with this and nobody else can. And what other laws do you plan to break when you're elected? It's unbearable. I'm saving my artillery for the last 15 minutes. There's something I want to talk about that most of you will find probably just completely ridiculous, but I'm going to do it anyway. Matthew Lloyd says, some have called Scalia's death suspicious, accepting that there was no foul play as assassination and the like beyond the current administration. Or do you think that more people have become conspiracy theorists because it seems less and less crazy to think our government might actually do some of these things? It's neither. And both of them, one of them is a result of the pop culture. Scalia was a man in his 70s who was very obese, had a serious heart condition, died in his sleep. There's nothing suspicious about this whatsoever. Heard all of this with Andrew Breitbart, who was considerably younger. And as I've said many times before, I'm not going to get into this again. A year before he died, we knew he was in big trouble. We tried to save him. And when I found out that morning, which is almost exactly 4 years ago, within 3 days or so, when I found out Andrew Breitbart had died of a heart attack the night before, I was surprised at how unsurprised I was. So let's get to the meat of the question. Is it beyond the current administration? It is. And the reason that people assume that the government will do things like assassinate people who are a threat, or bring down the towers, or fake the moon landing, is really because of Hollywood. Because we've seen it so many times that we believe it to be true. We've seen so many times where either businesses or governments just have people killed, and it makes great drama. And we've seen it literally hundreds, if not thousands, of times. I don't know, the guy's a whistleblower. What happened? He found dead in an alley. But you know the story. You've seen the backstory. You know the big reveal at the end. Of course they had him killed. Of course the government had him killed. Of course the CIA had him killed. Of course the big corporations had him killed. And it's drama, and it's storytelling. It just doesn't happen. Ever. I mean, think about some of these leaks, just think about some of these stories, some of these leaks. Nixon's presidency was on the line. Nixon didn't have anybody killed. All of these things just simply don't. They just don't happen. They just don't. The only exception, and I don't know much about it, was I think the Vince Foster thing is a little convenient. But even then, it just doesn't happen that way. If it did, I don't think there'd be a Rush Limbaugh around, or a Glenn Beck, or for that matter, a Michael Moore. There's a pretty compelling case to say that Michael Moore nearly switched that 2004 election. I mean, he was really getting a lot of traction. And evil George Bush and evil Dick Cheney didn't, they didn't have him bumped off. Nobody gets bumped off. You get bumped off in Russia, but you really have to push your luck. But when you get into socialist countries, when socialism reaches its full flower of, the workers' paradise, then you simply disappear if you dare to criticize the government. So to answer the first part of the question, is it beyond the current administration? It is, and it's beyond the last administration. It's beyond the next administration. People just don't have people killed. It just doesn't happen. And it seems odd to say it, doesn't it? Because you're so sure that they do, but you've seen it in movies, and those are movies. You can't see ray guns in space either. How many times have you thought if you go into space and fire a laser beam at something, you'd see this big red or green bolt? It's absolutely invisible. There's no way you could see it in space. Physically impossible. So there's a lot of things that we see and expect and believe, but just aren't true because of the movies. So that part of the question is, I don't think it's behind it. But what I think is another interesting part of the question is this business about more people becoming conspiracy theorists. And I think there's an interesting reason for that, too. I think it's got to do with YouTube, with the internet, but specifically with YouTube. Because prior to YouTube, where would you see these crackpot theories? There's not a network in the world that would have aired Loose Change. I mean, I could go through Loose Change on a literally frame-by-frame basis and just completely dismantle the whole thing. And there's no way a network would run something like that. There's no way a network would run all of these weird, bizarre conspiracy theories. There's no way that a network would run the moon landing as a conspiracy theory. At least not until very recently. I suppose now it's got enough momentum that you could ask questions. They did run a great Mythbusters that made the case as well as I've ever heard it put. But this is the point I'm leading to. YouTube, it's a wonder. I mean, look, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for the internet and YouTube and the ability for just regular people to just get out there with a camera and talk to everybody in the world. So I am, I'm not criticizing this, but one of the detrimental and darker aspects out it is that you can put together a documentary like Loose Change on 9/11 or the Moon Landing Conspiracy or whatever, and using skillful rhetoric and taking extremely small examples and literally freeze framing things that are obvious when you run them in real time. You can, without any rebuttal, make a case that if you don't know anything about it, sounds very compelling. And I'm not immune to that. I read a book called Best Evidence back when I was a limo driver. It must have been '88. It was about the Kennedy assassination and the belief that Kennedy was actually shot from behind, but while he was on Air Force One, they made entrance wounds and covered up the exit wounds, and it was like 500 pages, 3 pages dedicated to Levi Harvey Oswald. I read this in the middle of the night and thought, my God, they're going to come and kill me. I have the secret now. I should check out the door. I locked the door. I was really worried. So, when you read something like that, they're trying to sell a book. They're just trying to sell a book. Ancient Astronauts, classic example. On the plains of Nazca, Peru, are strange shapes designed for the sky gods. Look at this picture of this hummingbird. Notice how the wings of the hummingbird are exactly like the parking stations of these jet fighters at an Air Force base. Was this a naval base or Air Force base for alien flying saucers? Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Well, it turns out the hummingbird is 17 feet across, something like that. The Bermuda Triangle, the Marine Sulphur Queen disappears in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. Flight 19 disappears without a trace. Okay, well, it turns out we actually found Flight 19, but even before we found it, we knew that the likely event was that these guys got lost and had to ditch in the ocean. And the killer app as far as the Bermuda Triangle is, if you take an area the size of the Bermuda Triangle, place it anywhere over major trade routes in the world, you have an equal or greater number of disappearances. So once I heard that, I said, well, so much for that. And Loch Ness and all the rest. But because of YouTube, you can get somebody put together a case on anything. I can put together a case on anything. And as long as I just show what I want to show, people who don't know anything about it could do it. I could convince you that George Bush was a reptile or that George Bush had been replaced by another guy who looks like him. And I could show you pictures of him with the lighting different, and I could point little arrows, and I can do whatever I want to. So I think the reason more and more people are becoming conspiracy theorists is because they have access to nutcase theories that they didn't have before. Now, the good news is, it's kind of a nice segue to the last question, which is the one I wanted to spend so much time on. The good news is that while there's plenty of nuts out there and no filter on them, and I don't want to filter on them, there are, in fact, people out there who are doing remarkable work, and that leads me to the last question that I've saved 20 minutes for. If you want to leave now, you can go ahead. I just love this stuff. So, last question for today on our 1-hour Stratosphere Lounge is, Chris Taylor says, if you could make a planetarium show again, what would it be about, and how would you do it differently now that you are older and hopefully wiser? I thought about that. I thought, I don't know, everything I want to do has been done. And then I realized, oh, hang on here, Jason. There's something that I've been just watching endlessly on YouTube. I've talked about this before. My favorite YouTube video, I think, of all time is called Imagining the 10th Dimension. It's by a guy named Rob. I cannot remember. I can't believe I forgot his name. Yeah, I know it's going to come up in a second, but I got to do it because I just think so highly of the guy here in a second. Rob Bryanton. He's got this movie that I saw, a YouTube movie, 11-minute movie called Imagining the 10th Dimension. And I was always interested in these kind of things, so I just watched it. And as I've said before, watching it the first time, I felt like a dog watching TV. And then I watched it again and again and again. The more I watched it, the more it made sense. His idea is that the dimensions are stacked one on top of each other, and we do believe that there are 11 dimensions. And Rob's theory is that there are dimensions, and he explains the kind of symmetry of it. And there's one stage, second stage, third stage, and at the end of that stage, you shrink that down to a point. Then you get a second, third, and fourth. Shrink that down to a point. You get a second, third, and fourth. So it's threes of threes. And after I saw that, I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting. Then he did one on imagining the first dimension, imagining the second. Took a look at each one of the dimensions in order. And then I found out that he's got something like 80, 90, 100 videos talking about all kinds of really weird stuff. But the more I watch him and the more I think about it, the more I think he's right. Now, many physicists have said he's completely nuts, but when you start dealing with these kind of things, you're so far out there. He's got plenty of experimental evidence that does back him up, and people are kind of drifting his way. But here's the thing about the theory that Rob has put out. It's so elegant that I suspect it has to be true. Usually when you find something that simple, it almost has to be true. And his explanation for higher dimensions is so astonishingly simple. It's so clean and appears to be working in terms of predictability that I think he's right. So I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but I have been wanting to find an excuse to talk about this. So let me just tell you what I've come to believe is it. I'm going to have to just backtrack a little bit here, but here's the basics. So Rob Bryanton maintains that we are not three-dimensional creatures, that we're actually fifth-dimensional creatures. And here's how it works. This is why the guy is so brilliant. He's absolutely just genius. Here is an iPhone, right? And how many dimensions does this phone have? Everybody says, well, it's a three-dimensional object. It has 3 dimensions. No, it's a 4-dimensional object. This is the insight that Rob has given me by just constantly hammering it home. This is not a 3-dimensional object. It's a 4-dimensional object because the proportions, the dimensions of this object are, it has length, it has width, it has height, and it has duration. It has duration. It exists through time. And time is not a dimension. Time is a direction that we travel through the 4th dimension. That we are moving through the 4th dimension, which is just a physical dimension of space. This is the thing that I think is so elegant about this theory. He's not saying it's 3 dimensions plus this weird dimension called time, because time doesn't make any sense. We are moving in a one-way street down the 4th dimension called time. We can't see it. It's at right angles to the other 3 dimensions. You can draw pictures of things that look like they're at right angles to the other 3 dimensions, and you can see a 4-dimensional cube rotating on itself, which just does these weird twists, and it's just enough to give you that kind of dog-watching TV sense of something that is literally unimaginable, which is the 4th dimension. We can't picture it, but we can explore it, and since we can explore it, we know things like, if you look at 2-dimensional people, if you have a 2-dimensional person looking down on flatlanders, you could see that if there was a square, right, and there's a 2-dimensional person on one side, and then there's a square on the other, and there's a 2-dimensional person on the other side, they can't see each other because they can't see through the square. Well, in 3 dimensions, we can see around the square. We're above the square, so we can see around the square. In the same way, somebody in the 4th dimension watching our 3 dimensions would be able to see the inside and the outside of a building at the same time. They'd be able to see the inside and the outside of you at the same time. So we're moving through the 4th dimension, which is a spatial dimension at the speed of 1 second per second. And he talks about Planck time. Planck time is the smallest unit of time. It's the time it takes for a photon of light to cross a hydrogen atom. And I forget what the number is, but needless to say, it's trillionth of a second. But what's interesting about Planck time is, as we get into quantum mechanics, we find out that there's one frame of Planck time, and then there's another frame of Planck time, but nothing in between. In other words, you can't dice that up. You can't have a half a Planck time. It's one, and then it's the other, but there's nothing in between. It just doesn't work. It stops. So what Rob is basically saying is that we're living our lives in one Planck time of 3-dimensional time per second, and every single second that comes by, another Planck time of 3-dimensional space comes up. Now, he believes in the multi-universe theory, and I've come to believe it too. So here's why we're 5th-dimensional objects. He says that if you can imagine ourselves in the 4th dimension, for example, you've seen me here in the office. Let's imagine I'm walking behind me in the studio. What we see now of me is a three-dimensional cross-section of my four-dimensional being, because I have length, width, depth, and duration. You can see how tall I am, you can see how deep I am, you can see how wide I am, but you can't see my duration. This is the dimension that we can't see. And so as we move through this physical fourth dimension, all we get are something that looks like time. It's change. We can see here's 5 fingers and here's 1 finger. And look, it's changed. But what this theory is, and I believe this theory, is that there is a spline. It's like a snake of all of my three-dimensional motions, and there was a period there where there were 5 of them, and then further down the thing it went down to 1 of them. And if you think about me walking around this studio, just think of a giant snake that's an outline of everywhere I've been, but instead of me walking into myself, the reason I don't is because if I were to walk over to there and back, there'd be an undulating snake that looked like me, if you could see it in fourth dimensions. But the reason it wouldn't hit itself is because while I run to the studio and back in a straight line in 3 dimensions, I've actually moved through the fourth dimension of time. The duration has changed. So time is there to make sure that things don't happen all at once. But time is not real. This is the thing. Of all the things I would try to get you to believe is that there's no such thing as time. Time does not exist. Time is a limit of our perception of the fourth dimension as we move through it. So why aren't we four-dimensional creatures? This is the thing I think is so brilliant about them, and I'm not going to get into the higher dimensions, but 5 is really fascinating. Here's the thing. If we don't have any free will, then life is 4 dimensions. If we don't have any free will, then we go down through this timeline in the fourth dimension, and as we go down this timeline, everything's already there. There's no before and after. It's built, and it's the beginning and the end, and everything's predetermined and everything else. His point is that we do have the ability to make conscious choice, that random chance actions of others and our own decisions change what happens, and every time we change what happens, a different universe splits off, which is based on the fact that whenever we look at something, we observe it, we collapse its probability wave. If you observe something, it has to make a decision. In the quantum level, unobserved phenomenon exist in a state of both, and when you observe them, they literally have to make a decision because you observe them. So the reason he says we're a fifth-dimensional creature is because even though we're four-dimensional creatures, three-dimensional creatures moving through the fourth dimension, we have the ability to make a change, and since we can change, that actually shifts that fourth-dimensional timeline into the fifth dimension. So I think it's compelling. I think it's a compelling argument. Basically what he's saying is we're 5-dimensional creatures. We live in a 3-dimensional universe that's moving through the fourth dimension in a direction called time. And because we're able to make decisions, we're able to alter that fourth dimensional timeline, which is fifth dimension. I don't know. I think that's just bloody fascinating. I really do. And, when you get into things like superstring theory, the idea is that is that all of these things are encoded. Now, T.G. Gecko here has said that he has nothing but disdain for pop culture scientists, and he says waveform collapse has nothing to do with human consciousness. But it does have to do with being observed, right? I mean, making the observation does it. You've got these two particles. They did an experiment not too long ago in Europe where they had these entangled, what are they, quarks, I guess? Entangled particles, and they measured one, and the other one changed, and they don't know how fast it was. They suspect it was instantaneous. They know it was faster than 17,000 times faster than the speed of light. They're able to measure it. We have very sophisticated instrumentation. When you turn on a camera and look at a result, then you get a different result than you would if there was nobody observing it. I think there's no question that observing affects the outcome of things, and this is it. I think this is the thing that's so fascinating to me. This idea is that well, he says the observation has to do with the instruments, not the brains. Well, what made the instruments? The brains made the instruments. It's an absurd thing to say. Of course the instruments were made by brains and consciousness. I don't pretend to think that you can see an individual quark, and I don't pretend to think that you can, with your own eyes, take a look at whether two enmeshed particles are changing their polarity based on the observation. But the fact is that we do have instrumentation that shows that when you observe something, you change it, you compress the waveform. And those instruments were made by consciousness, so we are in fact observing it through our instruments. It's to say the instruments are doing it is ridiculous. The instruments they're not actively shooting out a beam or something. This is fairly solid ground as far as quantum is concerned. The idea that observation changes the outcome. This is the entire idea of Schrodinger's cat, right? Is that the cat in a box, a 50-50 chance of being alive or dead. This is the macro version of the quantum. The way to explain quantum is to say that the cat is neither alive nor dead until you open the box. And when you open the box, reality has to make a decision. So this is substantial. This substantiated. It's just proven. And so where do you go with all this stuff? This guy is not saying that he's not saying that this is what am I trying to say here? Rob Bryanton is not saying that his theory is something that is experimentally proven to form a picture of the universe. What he's saying is that everything that we observe can be explained by this theory of his, and that his theory is consistent, and I think it is consistent. We talk about the missing matter in the universe. The reason that these two, for example, these two enmeshed particles, one can be here, the other one can be on the other side of the universe. You observe it here, the other one changes instantly. It goes faster than the speed of light. Nothing is allowed to go faster than the speed of light. Rob says the reason it doesn't go faster than the speed of light is because these particles are actually touching each other in a higher dimension. And this is compelling to me. And the elegance of it is compelling to me. And the vision of it is compelling. But I will tell you this, if nothing else, I think, you're coming off like, this whole thing's a bunch of hooey, but you would have to admit that most scientists, Albert Einstein especially and inclusively, said time is just an illusion. He said it's a convenient way of expressing things in the real world, but there's no evidence that time exists outside of the rest of the universe as a special kind of a event or force. I mean, it's an illusion. And I think anybody who's looking at these things on that lower level says that this is true. So if nothing else, reading and watching these Rob Bryanton things have gotten me in the habit of getting away from time, from starting to think in a timeless way. A timeless way means there is no before and after. That's almost impossible for us to conceive of, but I believe it's true. And I believe the evidence backs it up. Look, the reason I believe this stuff is because the evidence. I don't go running around listening to YouTube nuts who have some theory that doesn't make any sense. The thing is internally consistent. It's extremely logical. It's extremely elegant. There's nothing that has been discovered that is against this particular theory, and it explains a lot of things. It explains a lot of things in a very elegant, predictable way. I think it's profound. I think it's just profound. And I've been studying astronomy, cosmology, quantum since I was, 13. Now, I'm not a quantum physicist, but I think a quantum physicist is looking at what he's got to do in a quantum physics laboratory. What Rob is doing is he's doing a thought experiment in the same way that Albert Einstein does a thought experiment, where Einstein says, if I'm in an elevator traveling upward in space at 1g, how is that different than being on a flat plane in a gravity field? Einstein asked questions like, if you're traveling on the speed of light and you turn on a flashlight, what would happen? What would you see? These are thought experiments, and they can teach us an awful lot. And Rob's thought experiments they're just profound. There's a book he quotes. He didn't come up with this, and he basically says that actually, when you think about it, zero is the most powerful number. Rather than being nothing, zero mathematically encompasses everything, because if you think about it, we think about zero as being the smallest zero. It's a nothing, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and going backwards, it's 199, 10, 9, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and zero is it's the nothing, it's the point. But on a timeline, beyond zero is -1, -2, -3, -4, so on, all the way out to negative infinity. You've got an infinite number of numbers one way, you've got infinite numbers the other way, and zero is the number that encompasses all of them, because what he's basically saying is, if you have zero, it encompasses all of the possible numbers, negative infinity to positive infinity. If you want to make it easier to understand, from -10 to +10, all of the numbers are in there, balanced out to equal zero. And if you take zero and you subtract 1, you're left with -1. If you subtract 5, you're left with -5. In a sense, those numbers were inside the zero as a reference point. And if zero encompasses everything, then, I mean, it's great. It's just, look, like I said, I've been studying this stuff my whole life, my entire life. It's been a real hobby for me, history and this kind of physics. And the more of this I watch, the more profoundly aware of things I become, the more consistent this seems to be, and the more I think about things, and the more I like, the more I believe it's true. I believe it's true, and just to give you an idea, of the level of thinking that this guy does, that I think is profound. Just stick with me for this on 1 second, because the hour's up. Just assume for a second that he's right, because I think on some level, at least in the 3-4 dimensional world, I think he's absolutely right, that the universe is a 4-dimensional creation. It's always been there. It'll always be there. It was built. You can't say by who, because it was always there. What came before it? That's a ridiculous question. What's on the other side of it? That's another ridiculous question. You can't comprehend these things with these little monkey brains. But let's imagine, for example, that the universe is an object. And Rob says one of the reasons that things don't go really, really badly, that the big catastrophes don't really happen, is because he believes that gravity is the one force that moves across dimensions. Gravity is instantaneous. The power of gravity is always there. It's a depression in space-time, but gravity exists faster than the speed of light. There's no gravitational... let me get back to this. Basically what he was saying, though, is this. He's saying, look, if you have all these multiple timelines and all these multiple universes, each one of them has mass, and the ones that are the ones that have the greatest mass have the greatest gravitational pull, and they're the ones that go the longest. The longest timeline is the one that's most likely, from a probability view, to exist, because it's pulling the other chance timelines towards it. You could say that quantum will tell you that there's a chance that I can disappear out of this chair and appear on the moon. It's a rather small chance. In fact, it is so exceedingly small that everybody agrees it would take the lifetime of many universes for it to happen. But technically, it could happen as far as this quantum field goes. But his point is, those things don't happen because the gravitational pull of the likely universes pull things towards the likely. It's just fantastic. It's just interesting. So in any event, I really like him, and if I were to do a planetarium show, I would talk about this not as a scientific theory so much as a mythology. Tim says, how can gravity move across time? You're thinking about time as a flow. Time isn't a flow. Time is a direction. Time is a location. And I think it's marvelous. In any event, I have sat there and watched. His channel is Imagining the 10th. It's called 10th Dimension on YouTube. He's got 60, 70 of these things. I find every single one of them to be really profound and interesting. And as I said, I've not seen anything. I've not seen anything that struck me as this is a leap. look, let's just assume for a second that the guy's completely wrong. It is an extremely elegant meta theory, and it is an extremely explanatory meta theory about things that no one seems to be really talking about, and it's got a mathematical clarity to it. So anyway, I think if you ask me what I would do for a planetarium show, that's what I would do. I would do time as a dimension and our decisions and free will as an ability to change the fourth dimension, and that we are actually five-dimensional creatures. I think it's freaking fantastic. And look, there's an hour. Now I have to go back to editing. So, as I said, I hate to miss a bunch of these things in a row. That is episode 114, and look at that, you got an extra, 5 minutes and 13 seconds of time, so there we go. I think that certainly the firewall will be done by this time next week. The website is sitting there ready to go, waiting for the firewall, so with any luck, we will be able to open all these things before then. And I'm very, very, very happy with that new website, and I'm very, very happy with the look of the firewall and the look of everything else. I just think it's great, and happy to be back in business. So there we go. That'll do it for episode 114 of the Stratosphere Lounge. As always, it's good fun to see everybody, and thanks again for the support. I got to get back to work. So until next time, we need a motto, Until next time, keep strata lounging. I'll think of something better than that, I suspect. Anyway, thanks everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.